One thing, and we were talking about it earlier, that we probably need to address just quickly is certain casting choices, not in terms of the ages we talked about just earlier, sure, but some other elements. So I don't know if you want to sort of...
This is all over the internet. I think a lot of our viewers will have seen this discourse. You know, the casting of Jacob Elordi was controversial because the character of Heathcliff is, in my opinion, pretty clearly not a white person in the book. And that's important because the book, you know, is about class, but it's also about race. And he's very much an outsider. And there's a lot of terminology used in the book to describe him, which indicates that he's not a white person. Some interpretations say he might be Irish, but I think the consensus right now is that he is either Black or he's South Asian or something like that. Mm-hmm. It didn't bother me that much. I understand why it bothers people because it is inaccurate from the book and it took away, you know, a great casting opportunity for an actor of color, which is a shame. Like, mm-hmm. You know, these adaptations need to be better about that. It didn't bother me as much as I thought it would because I thought Jacob Elordi did a fantastic job. But he's not who I would have imagined to cast. The other really short point I'll make is it's funny because there's no discourse really about the really great casting choices actually of Edgar and Nellie, who are both actors of color. Those characters are written as white. And I kind of love it. And I kind of love that it was just race-blind casting and it doesn't matter. And I thought they did a great job. But it was interesting.
Yeah, no, Jacob Elordi did a great job. And I think that's why, I guess, the film gets forgiven for it. Mm-hmm. But it does remove a dimension to the character. And I think that goes back to the general idea that the director really tried to simplify a lot of things. Yeah. But I don't know if there's a simplification sort of for the better. And certainly, understandably, some people are upset by this choice.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to see, you know, the best fan casting I heard of was Dev Patel, who I would have loved to see him as Heathcliff. He would have been fantastic. But anyway.
That would have been fun.
For the next adaptation.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, in 20 years' time. So at the core of this film, there's really two people, right? Mm-hmm. There's Catherine or Kathy and Heathcliff. Mm-hmm. And this defines, both in the book and in the film, so much of what's happening.
Right.
So what do we think of these characters, both individually and also their relationship? Mm-hmm. In particular, and I think a lot of people ask this basically, is this toxic? Is it healthy? Or what's going on here? Why is it going on?
You know, something that I think the movie tried to capture, but I'm not sure did successfully, which is, you know, the book has a lot more space to do this, is the fact that these two meet when they're kids, they're really young kids, and they grow up together with basically no exposure to anybody else at all.
Sounds healthy.
Right. You know, there are no other children their age except for Edgar Linton and his sister, who they meet relatively late in the game.
Right.
And so they are entirely reliant on each other from early childhood for everything. For every sort of social interaction, you know, every kind of, when they're younger, when they're playing, they're entirely dependent on each other. They grow up in the same abusive household. And so every single life experience either of these have had up until they're older teenagers, they've had it together. And I think people forget that because they think of their love story when they're adults. But the reality is that they are both, I think, bonded because of what they've been through together in a way that they will never be bonded with somebody else. And also, who else is there? Right? Of course, they're obsessed with each other. They don't know anybody else. Neither of them got to go to school. They don't live in a town. So I think that's really important to remember why they seem so codependent and so obsessed with each other. And, you know, Kathy says he's more myself than I am. That's because everything they've ever experienced, they've experienced it together. Right. But I also think there is aspects of both the book and the movie that are deeply romantic, even leaving the discussion of toxicity aside, right? These are people who are soulmates. They understand each other on like a psychological level, right? On like an elemental level. And there's a lot of really good dialogue from the book, which was fortunately, I think, carried into the movie from Kathy about this. And so these are people who do love each other. The way they express it might be toxic. Their codependency on each other might be toxic. The way they're kind of at odds from each other at one point might be toxic. But these are people who do really love each other. And I think there are scenes in the movie that just capture that so beautifully. It's genuinely moving.
So I actually think they're a bad match. I do not think they're soulmates. I think that they have trauma bonded. And because there are a lack of options, they know each other so well, there is love there.
Yeah.
But we'll call it the real world, I see relationships like this, where it's like there is chemistry, there is a true bond, but there's other things, and that's why it's these sort of tormented, volatile relationship, and I see that with them. And it's sort of like, yes, there's this, but there's also this, and this is why you folks actually should not be together.
Right.
So that's kind of how I viewed the relationship. And definitely looking at the characters individually, and I told you this, I think, at the time, I do favor Heathcliff as a character. Like, I'm like, okay, no one's healthy here.
Everybody needs therapy.
Everyone needs therapy. But I feel like Heathcliff has a little more introspection. He's a little more thoughtful emotionally.
Yeah.
Like a little more fleshed out is not really the term, but I think he's more grounded too. I think that Kathy is very self-absorbed. Like,
she is. She is in the book too.
In a way that Heathcliff, of course, he makes some terrible choices later on where he starts to lose me. He's like, okay, mate, that was not the move. Yeah. That was not what you should have done. That was extraordinarily destructive. But up till that point, I was just like, okay, I understand how you're feeling. You are probably the more reasonable, the more thoughtful one, the more emotionally whole-ish and looking outward. Kathy is just like, yes, she loves Heathcliff, but it's really everything's really in relation to what she needs and what she wants. And so I view her as just like a very inward-looking, more selfish character.
You can tell that I have a response. I think this might be a little bit of failure of the adaptation.
Okay. I haven't read the book. I'm going by the film.
And so it's very difficult because I keep going back to the book because I know it so well. But I think it also depends how you interpret the character even when you're watching the movie. I think what gets lost a lot of the time in this story is that people view Kathy as just like a point in a love triangle, and it's like Edgar or Heathcliff, right?
Oh, I see.
And how I think about the story now, having thought about it a lot, is that the opposition isn't actually Edgar or Heathcliff. It's actually who the kind of person Kathy is and who she wants to be, right? Heathcliff represents, a non-conventional lifestyle. I just stumbled over that word so badly. But a non-conventional lifestyle for a woman of that era. And there's a lot in the book, which I think is semi-captured in the movie, but not really, about kind of living this like wild existence on the moors with him, right? And being completely free. And Edgar is this conventional, basically the heteronormative ideal of a relationship, right? Home, family, wife, host dinner parties and socialize and basically live the life of a society woman of those days. And I think the thing with Kathy is that she has the duality in her to be both, but she doesn't have the opportunity to be both. She's got to be one or the other. And a lot of her behavior is because she's in this eternal conflict about which one she's going to be, because she can only be one. And both of these men only want her for that one thing that suits them. Edgar wants her to be a wife and mother. Heathcliff wants her to go wild with him on the moors. And she cannot have both, and she cannot be both. And that basically, I think, drives her insane eventually.
I think in my mind, I separated those out. There was the sort of emotional decision, there's the economic decision in many respects. And so her choosing Edgar, who seems like, at least in the film, like a very fine person, he's probably the only one I truly feel strong sympathy for by the end. Yeah. Because he hasn't really done anything
No, he gets
bad.
totally screwed over. He gets screwed over in the book and the movie.
Right. He's sort of the only fully good person. Yeah. Right? And he's sort of a stand-in for the counterpoint to Heathcliff, really, more than anything else. So I separated those out. It's sort of like she wants Heathcliff, but she needs this, the economic stuff. Yeah. And it makes sense. For the time period, it's a very different decision-making process because your situation is different, right? Your agency is much more limited as a woman, no doubt. So that made sense. And so I understood, and I understood why he was upset, but also it's like, mate, at the time, you had a man with no prospects.
Right. He doesn't really have a right to be like, you should have married me, because what were they going to, they would have just starved to death probably.
Well, and it's a brief thing, and I only remembered it just now. There was another gentleman who worked on the Wuthering Heights property.
Yes. Joseph. The servant?
Yes, yeah. and he'd had some sort of relationship with, I think, another servant.
Yes.
But she ended up going with someone of more means.
Yeah.
And he even basically says, what could I possibly expect?
Right.
I am just this guy offered that, this is the way of things, right?
Yeah.
And that very minor scene, but it is the counterpoint to how Heathcliff reacts.
Yes. I that was actually a nice addition in the film, I thought, for that point that you're making.
Yeah. But overall, I look at both of them, as you said earlier, they both need therapy, right? And I don't think that overall they're healthy for each other. Yeah. Because it is this cycle of chemistry, like positive chemistry and passion and connection, all that sort of stuff. But then you've got this other thing that just adds a huge amount of negative volatility to everything and makes it toxic. And over the long term, I see that as just draining people and probably like poison. It has the potential to poison a relationship. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's kind of shortcut because they're relatively young. When, in the film, let's say, Kathy goes off the stage of that storyline. So we don't get to see how that might have progressed otherwise. But overall, it's just like, you shouldn't be together, not because you don't have good things, but because you have these things as well. And that's really... Yeah, so you do think that they're soulmates and they're good for each other?
I don't think that they're good for each other because of circumstance. The circumstances are she has married somebody else, right?
I see what you're saying.
And he didn't have any money, and they couldn't have gotten together then. But I think that there are relationships where you are so in tune with somebody else that nobody else, like Edgar can be the best husband in the world, and I think that he is. I think he is. I think he gives her everything she could ever dream of. I think he's a nice guy. He's like that in the book too. I think he genuinely loves her. I think she loves him. But I think the pull that she feels to Heathcliff, because they're in tune with each other.
And I think that's probably the difference between how we're thinking about it. So you would only sort of disqualify the relationship on the basis of circumstance. I would on the basis of their personalities.
This is the difference in our personalities.
Maybe.
Like for me... I'm not saying like love conquers all, right? And I think that's dumb. What I'm saying is that they are so intensely bonded, just like they speak a different language, right? And Edgar is never going to understand her on that visceral level. And she has dialogue that is so fantastic that I remembered it word for word 15 years later. I've read this book once when I was 20, right? And there's dialogue in there, which is actually in the movie, where she says he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. And it's very like trite now, but what she's saying is we have such a deep understanding of each other that like there's an eternal bond that is never going to be severed. Right?
And for me, that's where the tragedy comes in, right? Because they do have all of that, and thus, difference of I guess conclusions on that.
Yeah. Well, what I think is a shame that nobody ever talks about is the fact that I think she does love Edgar. I think she loves Edgar in a completely different way. And it's not fleshed out in the movie at all, but my interpretation of the book is this really is a love triangle. She does love him in a completely different way, treats him appallingly because Heathcliff comes back on the scene, right? They probably would have been happy if he hadn't.